Hi, Michelle. How are you doing?
I'm good, Elisa. How are you?
I'm doing great. You were telling me about an awesome dream you had with Erik where you were able to actually look him in the eyes, and I was in there in an RV, all three of us together sitting at a table, and his eyes were sparkling. And I turned to you and said, uh, doesn't he have the most beautiful eyes? And he does. Erik, you have beautiful eyes.
He says, "Thank you, Mama." He's talking about them being your eyes. They're
Yeah,
like your eyes,
yeah.
beautiful eyes like
Before mine
you.
got all saggy, but
He's
yeah, he's got
laughing.
yeah, big eyes. His dad has smaller eyes. All right, we are going to talk about, and we've talked to brushed this subject a little bit, but I kind of want to go into more depths because we're talking about emotions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things is, um, well, you keep saying we are emotional beings. Can you go into more detail about what the heck that means for people?
He says,
Oh, I love
he
you.
goes,
I love you. I love you. I love
he's,
you.
you must have, yeah, he just goes, before I start speaking, he goes, tell my mama how much I love her.
Oh,
And yeah, he says, I love you so much. And he said, yeah, love, emotion. He said that yes, we are emotional beings, we're feeling beings first. That is how we receive information, is through our emotions. um, so a lot of folks think, or may have believed, the way we've been taught through society, he says, that the thought comes, the situation comes, and the emotion reacts. He says it's the other way around. It's the what you feel first, it's the emotion first, and then creates the thought. And he says, and that's what many folks through the awakening process are discovering, is that we really haven't been taught the way our true being functions. We
well, why
haven't
did we,
been taught.
why did we transition to where we go? Think a thought, have that provoke a feeling, and make that feeling create a thought, an action or a decision. What happened, and when did it happen?
He's saying, so he's going back to, is that Atlantis? Lemuria, like way back.
Oh wow!
Um, he says, we're going back to the beginning of when we were ascended beings, when we were in the human body, and we were able to manifest quickly. We were able to do things that right now would seem magical and mystical, and to some would seem impossible, but truly is our pure form. He says that there's a mixture of things that have occurred, and part of this is there was, and he wants to be careful how he's saying this, because he says this does and can spur off some conspiracy theories, and he doesn't want anyone to get heavily attached to this idea.
Right?
But he said that there are other lower vibrational beings that, for the sake of control, for he's talking about their receiving energy. They were um, uh, vampiring energy, he
Oh,
says,
we suck
from
the
us.
emotions
That
out of us. No,
mhm. He says, well, it started to close us down. And he's also talking about, in the when that had sunk, had he's talking about the world had diminished. This was gone, and when we were reincarnated as a collective, that the awareness was not there, that we as spirits had chose to incarnate without the awareness. And he's talking about this being living many centuries as not having the awareness of who we truly were. Started this, okay, just slow down just a little bit. He's really going fast. He's very excited about this topic. He says, look at it this way. Okay. He's going to give a little bit of an analogy to make this a little less complicated, and how he's going to say it. So he says, if you can imagine this, let's look at it this way. As Atlanteans, the Lemurians, being aware of our full selves, there were other beings that were coming to the earth, revealing their, he's saying star beings, beings of other universes. He said that this was the closing down. He's saying trickery, that like a trickery. It had to do with control. It had to do with where the earth was at. So there is that element. That's what he said. He wanted people to be careful about really adhering to that topic.
Okay.
Because he says it is something that happens. So as Earth was rebuilt, he says as humanity was starting to move along, in spirit, they were no longer, or sorry, in human form, they were not aware of who they truly were. This wasn't
Christ and Buddha, basically. They came without spiritual amnesia.
Yes, exactly. And he says, and that these beings that came, just as he said, because Mom, that's exactly right. In spirit, they sent beings or spirit in human form to show people, to show the other humans what was possible, what was available to them.
Yes.
But he says, this is not an easy task.
No.
And this is the journey of ascension. He goes, and he's circling our time. He's got 2019 with a big star around it saying, currently we are in this awakening. And he says, we could get into all the conversations of, the agreements that were made, the volunteers that came into Earth at different times. But he says the whole purpose for all of this has been to be able to show the world, to be able to show.
Uh-oh. You muted. You got muted. Oh.
Am I good?
Yes.
Okay. To be able to show humanity who we truly are. He's saying that there are many different topics that can come from what we're talking about, but this is the awakening time.
Yeah, we should talk about, we should have a whole subject, maybe the next time you and I have a session about the awakening, what that entails. But it sounds like part of it is, or maybe the main thrust of it is, going back to feeling first and thinking second. Now, is that true? Before I ask another question.
Yes, absolutely, okay.
Mom. How do emotions provide information? How does that happen? And where does it happen? In the brain and in the soul? In the conscious, the subconscious? I don't know. Tell me.
So he says so if we look at our chakra system, if we look at the meridians, our energetic field, he says to understand this concept, first of all, is to understand that we are all energy. Everything is energy, and carry a frequency and a vibration.
Including thoughts and emotions.
Yes, including thought and emotion, absolutely. And so he says, he's just asking you, would you like an example such as, he was just showing me, say, sadness. Something happened, created sadness or created some sort of desperation. So he's just saying, if we look at, let's say a situation were to make someone or someone reacted with sadness, he says, so that's coming in through the heart chakra, he says, and being received by the right side of the brain.
Okay.
So that energy is then, he goes, if we're consciously aware of what the trigger is, and he goes, now this can get a little bit complicated as well, because what we're doing is we're receiving an emotion that has a frequency. Our energy field, he says, like a receiver, we are like a transistor radio with many different stations. And he says that we're able to receive this. And here's where we have this, he just says, Mom, do you want me to continue on about talking about where it goes from there?
Wait, hang on. Can you move a little closer, Michelle? Because now it's not triggering your face to come up. It's people have to look at my face. I'm sure they'd probably rather look at your face.
How's that?
Let's
Better?
see. Well, we'll see if you talk,
Okay.
if your picture
Okay.
comes in. What's going on with my hair? Man, God. Okay. Hang on.
Okay. So he's just saying, Mom, do you
There.
want me to he just wants to say, do you understand that? He says, you want me to go forward and just explain what happens when somebody either doesn't recognize the emotion or shoves it down, or compared to being consciously aware to it. He says, would you like to know those
Yeah,
differences?
just give me the short version,
Like a quick.
but dumb it down, because I do want to ask about emotions in other species real quick.
Okay.
Well, not real quick.
So he just said that let's keep on with the idea that we are a transistor radio, that
Okay.
we have all of these different frequencies and dials that he says we consciously can be aware of, and we're able to understand our emotions in this way. So he said, if, say, the sadness emotion comes in, if a person is not consciously aware at what is making them sad, there may be an outside trigger that makes them sad, but that sadness could be really from some guilt or some pain that had happened from something before, or even in a past life. If that person were to unconsciously take that sadness and it had something there for them that they needed to understand so that they could release it and not carry it, he said that vibration, that frequency, that energy then is received and stored in the chakra systems, which in turn stores into our body.
Oh
And he
boy.
said this is where we talk about the dis-ease that we feel then turns to the disease in the body when it is not recognized, when it is not released and understood. So he says someone that is consciously aware of it has then the opportunity, when an emotion comes forward, they're able to say, is this mine? Is this somebody else's? Is this even something that I need to focus on? If it is something that needs to be focused on, then that person then has that opportunity to figure out, is it something that was from before, to go down that path to be able to release it and to heal. So he says many people are experiencing this very scenario right now and
Okay.
discovering it.
Interesting. Fascinating. Okay, well, let's talk about how our emotions differ from the rest of the animal and plant kingdoms. I mean, what sets us apart? And then I'll talk about, yeah, well, let's start up with that. But then I will ask about bird emotions and things like that.
So he says that what sets us apart in when we're looking at species on the earth is the consciousness. So the consciousness and the awareness. He's just saying, like when you had said a plant and an animal, a plant does not have an awareness of itself. It is a life force,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't have an awareness of itself. So he says the plant is not going to cry if you pull a leaf off.
But it's
So
said that they have emotions. I mean, I saw that thing, The Secret World of Plants, and they have
yes,
measuring things on them. And when a scientist comes and rips up their little friend, they like essentially scream.
he says it's not to the degree. He's not saying that he said there's life force. It's not that there isn't anything there, but they can only go so far.
Okay,
It's not felt the same way.
so our emotions are different for humans compared to other things, is because we are self-aware of our emotions. Is that what you're trying to say?
We have the awareness of it. He's just saying that there are some animals. Now, and he goes, we'll talk about this, Mom, when we talk about the different species, but there are some animals that do sense emotions slightly different than others, or
Mm-hmm.
are more aware of themselves than others. And we could also talk about animals that are, he's saying, domesticated,
Mm-hmm.
that are able to grow with their emotions because of the relationship that they have with their human
Okay.
counterparts.
Well, okay. Let's we'll get to that one at a time. But okay, so why do we need / have emotions anyway? Because they can be very painful sometimes, but they can be good too. But so why
Yeah.
do humans have emotions?
He said at first, he says, hell yeah, they can be painful.
Mm.
Absolutely they can. And he says, here's the tricky part is that we need the emotions. We need to be able to feel. That's what we're here for. That's what we came here for. He says we're here for the contrast. We're here
Yeah.
for the experience, and the experience is actually the having, not judging good or bad, but to be able to feel the emotions and to be able to experience them regardless of where on the scale that they are,
Okay.
because everything is an experience. And he says with emotions comes the growth.
Yeah.
So when one is pushing those emotions away, pushing them down, covering them up, or self-medicating with substance abuse or anything else like that, then they're not in line with what they're really here to do. And that's where all of the resistance starts to come in one's life. Emotions are, um, he's saying, he's showing me like a big city, and he's showing me this big tower in the middle. And he says, emotions are the great big staple, the big, what is it? Empire State Building, he says, is what he's showing me. It's the big building. It's what we are. It's who we are. It's why we're here. And having the emotions and the experiences, he said, is what gives us the greatest amount of growth. We're not able in spirit to have the same contrast. We can't have that same experience that we can here on earth.
I am
And
going
so,
to ask about that
mhm,
next, but it's interesting you say about self-medicating and drug abuse, because I've heard from lots of different people that specialize in substance abuse that when a person is addicted to substances, whatever, when they do go through rehab and they're fine, they're off it, they're sober, they're still stuck in that emotional age. If they started when they were 14, their emotional age is like that of a 14-year-old. So like no growth.
yeah, he says that's right, Mom, because what's happening is when one starts to self-medicate themselves, it's like a blanket's being put over top of them. It starts to halt them, and it energetically is putting them into a cycle, a repeating cycle. So these emotions keep coming up, because really what's happening is it's, your, okay, as he says, it's your innate self screaming out saying, hey, feel me, feel me, feel me. You need to feel me. And because that causes one so much deep pain, it's regardless of what it is, because there's okay, he's just saying, let's look at an example of a person. He says, and we may have been this person or are this person or know somebody that is, and he goes, and that's okay. But the person that keeps saying, why does this always happen to me?
Mm.
Why do it doesn't matter what it is, I'm continuously having the same thing. Every
I've
story.
said that before in regards to betrayal. Why do people always betray me when
And
not
he says,
always?
and it's very normal, because you
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
So he said, now, if we take that and we understand that when we don't have the awareness of what it actually is happening to us and what we are doing, because this involves the law of attraction, this is all of it combined together. It all works with our emotions. So he says, if we're not aware, we're going to be in that cycle over and over, and it's bringing, and really, he says, we're meeting experiences in the world that are going to be of the same flavor. It's going to have the same vibration to it, because that's where we are. And he says it's really as simple as that. It really is all about emotion, vibration, and about the focus into that, and the understanding that we do have the control ourselves to make a choice to move out of that. But
Right.
that, he says, and he says, I'm not diminishing the pain, because when one person is in a cycle of pain, they are consistently throwing out an SOS everywhere,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
may not understand or be ready to actually receive the help.
But then you attract the same and you attract disease and all that stuff. But I can see how emotions, I mean, you have to have them in order to have that contrast. And you have to get pissed off that somebody betrayed you so that you can really, it must embed it in your soul when you overcome that and forgive. Or so how do emotions change after we die? How's it different, like with you, Erik?
He's talking about when he first passed. So he says that the very first thing that he felt, and because he was still very close to his human self in that very first bit, was the regret, was the pain of not, he's calling it not fully understanding the full capacity of what had happened.
Yeah.
And he says that that was a, he's not calling it a really heavy emotion, but it was, he could compare it to how we would feel in concern when we're really concerned.
Yeah.
That's how it felt to him. He says it wasn't long after that he was lifted to a very different place. And he's also saying that for him, this was his path. So this was what he was meant to do. So his healing process and how he moved to that was, say, different from another spirit in the same situation because of what his destiny, his, however we want to call it, his
The
journey in
spiritual
spirit.
contract. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
But it
So
must have been so hard for you to see the pain in the family, at least at first. And then when you were able to lift yourself up to that different perspective.
he says, I felt responsible, Mom. I felt like I needed to correct it. And it was, he says it was a gradual understanding. But he says I did become more and more, he's calling it encapsulated with knowing and
Okay.
understanding of the bigger picture. And so he says that it wasn't long after that his entire being was completely lifted. And so he's just saying that in spirit, for himself, he says that he does lower his vibration, and he is able to do so for the purpose of what his spiritual contract, or what he does. And he says, but he might be able to feel or know where somebody is at to understand the depth of what they're going through, but he doesn't need to have the experience, for one.
Right.
He
I mean,
says
you
he
probably
can
don't
understand.
feel the intensity of, say, depression or despair. I mean, what you told us before is that it's so hard to hold on to negative emotions. It's like trying to grab greased monkey bars and hang on. Is that?
He just said, he goes, it's like, it's like having butterfingers
Yeah.
in an ice cube. It's
Okay.
just, he says, it's just not tangible.
Yeah.
We can experience, he calls it a blip.
Yeah.
So it's just, he says we can choose to experience it if we would like to. We can move into that experience for a blip if we choose to. But he says it's not necessary, because with the greater understanding and with our higher vibration, or he says, well, he goes, more expanded. He's just correcting me because he doesn't like me doing it this way. He's saying more, with a more expanded vibration. Um, he says we come from a place of compassion and love, because when somebody is in that vibration and we are going to assist that one, we understand, we know. He says, myself and where I've been, I understand as a human being, I know how fucking hard it is. I
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And he says, so that's why I am Erik. That's why I do this the way I do.
And that's why you're so good at what you do. You do understand the really negative, crippling emotions. So,
he says, I do. He just wants to say too, he goes, sometimes some people do get, he wants to address this because he says there are some people that do feel like they're going through some really hard times in life, and that he says when I'm being translated, because I might, I'm using humor, or I'm very passionate, and he says my messages are coming through with such passion and intensity and joy, or what's being translated can sometimes be misunderstood into thinking that I don't understand that or that I forget that. And he says, and that's not true. He wants to make sure that each and every person knows that he does understand that
Oh,
part.
that's really good to know. I didn't think about that, but that's so true. But you can feel any positive emotion, right? Like you're probably are you like in the constant state of joy or rapture or?
He says it's a state of serenity. It's a state of, okay, he's trying to give me an example of something that, okay, all right. So he's giving me an example of something that I feel. He's telling me, explain to them something that you feel, and this will give an idea. So I have this something that I've always said. My brother and I have always talked about it. It's this Sunday afternoon feeling. It's the feeling of knowing that all the laundry's done, the house is clean, supper's cooking, my kids are together, my family's here. I feel good. I know everything's done. It's that place in life where you just
Right.
feel
Everything's checked off the list. My
yes.
index card list.
He says it's that feeling, and there can be measures of intensity to that.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about different animals. Describe the emotions of most mammals that are not us, and then we'll separately talk about, because I think they maybe are in a different category. I'm not sure. Dolphins, horses, chimps/gorillas, and domesticated animals. But as a general rule, most mammals, how are their emotions?
He says most mammals have he's calling it they do have a heart connection.
Mm-hmm.
He says it's different than the human being because, again, we get into a talk about the awareness, about the consciousness, and there is an instinct that animals have, such as they feel a bond, and it is he's calling it it's an instinctive love. So it's a little
Okay.
different than how we would describe love. It's instinctive. So he says, let's give an example of a deer. He's
Mm-hmm.
showing me a deer in the woods.
I don't know why your face is not showing up. I had to sit there and look at my face with my funky hair sticking up.
Okay, let me move myself a little bit more
No, I
forward.
don't know if it's that. Maybe it's a sensitivity thing. I have to look at the settings. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm tired of looking at me. Ugh.
Okay, so he just said if we look at a deer and say a mother deer that gives birth to a fawn,
Yeah.
and she's caring for that little fawn, he says, you know, we've seen many little instances where we see a deer crossing the street, or he says a duck and the little ducklings following behind the mother. And we think as human beings, oh, that is so cute. Look at the love. Look at how that mama duck makes sure each one of those babies gets across the street. Look at how that mama deer is cleaning her little fawn and looking for that fawn to lay it down. He says, yes, there is a love, but it's an instinctive love. It
Okay.
is a protective, a nurtured, but it also goes through its own evolution because eventually that little duck, like we do as well, starts to move on its own and separate. He goes, so it's not common. He says it's not that it never happens, but it's not common for, say, an adult mammal in the wild or to stay with the adult.
Well, what
Because
about,
unless it's part of their pack, like to stay with the mother, it
yeah.
goes off on its own.
What about animals that mate for life? Is there any like soulmate connection there, or is it just the same thing, sort of instinctual love?
He's saying that he says it is, because there can be different levels of intensity. And he says, he wants to say this too. He goes, there's also circumstances too, because this really isn't a black and white answer. He
Oh
says
yeah.
emotions are complex. So even though we say that the awareness and how animals are slightly different, but he says they do have the potential and capacity to evolve and to grow. Many mammals have that ability to relate to another
Oh.
counterpart. He He's saying human, and to be able to evolve. But when they're in the wild, they stay more instinctual because they're not aware. Would you say, Eric? They're not aware of any different. They're
Okay.
not aware that there is. So he said, now he wants to add this into, keep in mind that as beings, we have had many incarnations, or
Mhm.
incarnations that are going on, and we have experienced that very same life. We have had lives as mammals and as different, he's saying, beings, creatures. And he says there are soul contracts in animals to be able to mate and bond. There are
Mhm.
soul contracts that exist, that this is why this isn't a black and white answer,
Okay.
because this is how um, we may see, say, two animals in the wild, like birds, and people have seen these two birds are together, they come back every year. Or the story about, they've tagged two animals in the wild and found them together so many years later, or something like that. He goes, human beings, part of that is also a spiritual contract for the human beings to observe this, because
Oh.
this is what's meant to have the experiences to open up the awareness of ourselves and for evolution. So he
But
says,
in the wild, at least, they don't really need emotions to evolve and grow like we do, right?
right,
For the
right,
contrast and all.
right.
Can they feel sad in the same way that we do, or is it different?
He says, yes, they can.
I know they can feel anger,
Yes,
but that's probably a survival
protectiveness,
mechanism.
and he says, so it is more, and he says, saying it instinctual again. So they can have despair, they can miss a mate.
Mm.
It also depends more on the species, because when we speak on an instinct level, there are some species, and he's showing me a grasshopper, that he goes, a grasshopper really couldn't a grasshopper really couldn't give two fucks what happens to the other grasshopper, he says.
But I know elephants. I think elephants can, and like crows and stuff. They create funerals.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And he says, so that's so different beings. So he says, so we start to move to like when we talk about dolphins and gorillas and chimpanzees, elephants, and they are their learning capacity is different. They are closer the to the human structure, but he's
Okay.
saying that it's not always there, or it's not always always noticed. Is that what you mean? Or, okay, it's not okay, it's not always present, not always present.
What's not always present?
Well, that in every situation, like with instinct, he's showing me elephants, and he's saying that
Oh, okay.
not because there's certain things that they do, and they do have like a mourning, but he's talking about um different mammals having like a pack mentality, like something they do as a pack. But he's saying that it's more instinctual. Animal has more of an instinct of doing, like, this is what we do because we know to do it. But that they don't go home or back to a den or back to a log and necessarily mourn for days. But he says it's not that that can't happen.
Wow. All right. So how does sadness and mourning, how does that serve them, you know, from the standpoint of survival? Or does it?
Okay, so he's just saying that it's more of, he says it's more of something that has the experience of, he says, so say we have soulmates, because soulmate connections happen in animals. We incarnate with all of these different ideas. So it's more for the soul's growth.
Ah,
So if you imagine the soul of, so it may not be something that's happening knowingly as a lesson for an animal, but there's still a soul growth to it. There is still an experience that's happening, because every incarnation that we have has some sort of like okay, right from a firefly, he says everything has a reason for it, a soul growth to it. even though the human experience is the golden ticket
Yeah.
for expansion. But he says that this is all part of evolution.
So what if you're a human and you've expanded to a certain point, and then you become a turtle? What is that turtle going to be like? What is their soul going to be? Very expanded? It's like in the smoking jacket with a pipe, reading, Nietzsche,
That's so funny. He just said, Mom, he goes, but that's thinking very linear as well. So
Oh, true.
if we think, right? So he says he's using your wheel and spoke.
Okay.
And just saying, so if we've got the wheel and we've got our spokes of all of our lives, and they're truthfully stacked on top of each other, they're truthfully all happening at once, and each one is an experience that can be tapped into.
Yes.
So he says what a soul has learned, grown from every experience is stored up in their higher self, is stored up in their oversoul,
which is the hub.
Yes, which
Yeah,
is
y'all can look up search wagon wheel in the search bar in the top right hand corner of the blog if you want to find more information. Or sometimes he describes lives as a stack of books, and we just happen to be pulling out one and reading the one now, but all the others are still there, past and future.
Yes, because he said our human, and he's talking about this time right now, because this wasn't always available to this degree energetically. The energy that we are in right now, for many different reasons that we've been talking about with ascension and everything, he says that the energy right now allows us as human beings, if we choose to, because we all have free will, to tap into any of our lives at any time and to be able to bring that wisdom forward. And even though as human beings we may not consciously understand what it is we're pulling out, but we understand what we want to know. We're looking for the wisdom. We're looking to connect with the wisdom. Our higher self knows where to find that. Is able to bring that forward for us. So he says it's important to know that we can all do that. So he says when we're thinking about, he says that using past lives is really not the best description for what it is. It's more like existing lives, other lives, because they're technically all happening at once.
Right now. All right, one more question. I think what we'll do is a part 2 where we could talk about the different animals. Do you want to discuss any more? We discussed love and sadness, despair, mourning. Are there any other emotions that mammals have that you want to elucidate for us? Or would that just give us the picture we need?
He says he said, because if we go a little further, we're going to get pretty in depth. He goes, we could go down that, but the basic understanding, and he says just adding anger on there too, and saying that goes along with what he was talking about, because it's all kind of the same idea with the different emotions with them. He says, no, Mom. He goes, I think we pretty much covered that part. We're good.
Okay, so basically it's all instinct driven. Mammals are not as aware of the meaning behind their emotions or what was that? As humans are. And they're not evolution as much. I can't remember.
They're not as consciously aware of themselves, or say the full picture why. He says, although that does, so as we get into evolution of animals and what they're able to understand, some do because they've had some human interaction.
We'll get to that. Yeah. Okay, sounds great, you guys. Thank you so much. This was really interesting, huh?
This was interesting. I love this conversation.
And we'll get to more different animals, and then we'll have a session on awakening, ascension, and all that stuff. It'd be fun to do together. All right, so you guys check out Michelle at the healing and then h-art.com, and I'll put it right here. Thank you, Erik. I love you. And Erik, somebody's been really working well on my back because my lower back pain, and they said that I need to. I need to, somebody needs to open up my heart chakra. Is that something you and your cronies over there can work on? Or do you want me to go have somebody else do it
He says,
remotely?
yeah.
What?
He says having a remote session would help you, Mom. He said
Okay.
that would be good. It would help, but he's also saying that lay down at night, or when you can have a little bit of quiet when you're not too sleepy. He goes, don't do this when you're like ready to just fall asleep.
Okay.
He says if you can get yourself quiet where he's talking about it doing later in the day because you're going to relax more.
Okay.
If you do it too early, it's not. So anyway, he says just call me in and ask me to start working on my heart. Say, Erik, come on in and start working on the heart chakra, because he's showing me putting energy over it. And he said
Okay.
that you will feel some physical sensation in that area, some warmth. And he says that we can practice that. If you want, Mom, he goes, you only need about 4 or 5 minutes a day if you can do that, and we can practice that together.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. I love you. I love you, Michelle. Until later. Bye, everybody. Be sure you subscribe to the channel so you get notifications of new ones. And also, for things that are not in YouTube format, check out the blog channeling Erik with a K, because there's a whole bunch of stuff, including the stuff about time and everything, before I decided to go ahead and start doing YouTube. So, see you later, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.